Hello and welcome to the Beckoning Bookshelf. I'm your host, Jeffrey Ashcraft. I have finished C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy, and wow, that was a journey. Of anything, I can say that the journey was surprising. I didn't know what to expect when I started reading this trilogy, but where C.S. Lewis takes his readers in this trilogy is, I couldn't even imagine it. And that's a good thing, because it made for a very unique experience. I haven't read a book or series that has surprised me that thoroughly in a long time. So I'm going to remember this trilogy for a while. That Hideous Strength was published in 1945. And, of course, is the third and final installment for C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy. Now, to talk about what this book is about, I'm going to read two sentences from the synopsis here, because I think it's well written, and it's a good start-off point. The dark forces that were repulsed in Out of the Silent Planet and Paralandra are massed for an assault on the planet Earth itself. It is up to Ransom and his friends to squelch this threat by applying age-old wisdom to a new universe dominated by science. Sounds fascinating, right? And I gotta be honest, I wanted to read that mostly because of the usage of the word squelch. I just loved the usage of that. So, that's the synopsis for the book. And I think it's technically correct. I think it is kind of misleading, though. It doesn't get the right tone for the book's contents, in my personal opinion. But like I said, this adventure takes place on Earth. So we're no longer going to other planets, which is kind of disappointing. I loved exploring C.S. Lewis's other planets. It was one of my favorite parts of the series. Now we're on Earth, but that makes sense. Literary-wise, story-wise, this is where the big battle was going to happen. We knew that from the beginning, so it makes sense. Am I still a bit disappointed? Yes. And speaking of that, we also don't visit wherever is depicted on the cover here. I have an idea where it is, to be completely honest, but I'm not going to say because it might be spoilers. But we don't actually go here, which is kind of disappointing since we visited the illustrations in the other books, and it's a cool illustration. But sadly, this isn't a place we visit. Now, if I were to compare this book to another book, a more well-known book of a similar feel and theme, it would be George Orwell's 1984. And in fact, George Orwell read this book and reviewed it in 1945, and it's entirely possible that it helped inspire at least some of his eventual book, 1984. Because there's a lot of similarities between the two books. It's like, so in 1984, Big Brother, the dangerous organization that's all-powerful, it's already all-powerful. It's already taken over everything. Well, this is kind of like, this could be viewed as a prequel to that, in which the evil organization is just getting started. It's now about to try to take over everything. It's now about to get all-powerful. So that's how you could view this book, That Hideous Strength. Now, is it a well-written story? My personal opinion, not exactly. It is a piece of good literature. It covers interesting themes. The characters are mostly well-written. And his usage of language, as usual, C.S. Lewis, his intellect is ever present in here. I'm not sure if C.S. Lewis is capable of writing something that is bad literature. But in my personal opinion, the story, while it is it is a good concept for a story and an interesting story, it's not a well-told story. And I'll give you 3 reasons why. First off, I really wondered if I was reading the right book when I started this book. I questioned that more than once, because there are so few references in the beginning to the previous books. Like, there's nothing at all until page 39. And the chapter structure is different because now there's sub-chapters, the completely different protagonist, completely different setting, completely different feel. And I really did wonder if I was reading the right book. I purchased the box set. So it was in the box set, and I read the synopsis. I know Dr. Ransom is in the synopsis, but I really wondered, did they print the wrong book? Is that a thing that happens? But no, it was the right book. It just takes a long time to connect, really, to the previous two entries. And that, I believe, is a detriment to the book. Because you don't want the last entry of your series or trilogy to be vastly different from the other two books, unless there's a very specific reason to do that, and that reason is very visible. Because if it isn't, then people are going to wonder, is this the right book? And may simply just put it down because they think it's the wrong book. They see no connections there. That's not to say that the last entry of the book has to be exactly the same, has to follow the exact same formula. There can clearly be changes, but you don't want it to be vastly different unless there's a very clear reason for it to be so. So that's problem one. Problem two, this book both gives you too much information and too little information at the same time. So this book is massive. It's the size of the previous two books put together. But I think at least about 60% of this book is not needed. There's just a lot of information that you get in this book that you simply don't need. It's very, very bloated, in my opinion. The type of bloated where it feels like C.S. Lewis overwrote just so he could get paid more, like paid per word type thing. So I got to write a lot of words in order to get paid a lot of money. You know, I'm not saying that's what happened with this book, but that's the feel I get with it. Now that's the too much information, but the too little information, you're not given critical information to really understand what's going on in the story until very, very late in the book, when it really doesn't matter anymore. So, for example, one of the protagonists we follow now is Mark. Like I said, we follow new protagonists, so Dr. Ransom is nowhere to be found for a long portion of the book. So now we follow Mark, and Mark is getting recruited into the National Institute of Coordinated Experiments, also known as NICE. It's hard to remember the name of the organization. And that's the evil organization. That is the big brother of that hideous strength. And it's interesting, the fact that it's called NICE, that there's some layers there, but that's a discussion for another day. So, NICE is trying to recruit Mark, the protagonist. Why? Well, for the first probably 200 pages, I couldn't tell you. Because it doesn't really talk about it. Mark isn't really significant in any way. He's not extremely intelligent. He's not an excellent writer. He's not extremely bright. He is intelligent. He's a college professor, but he doesn't stand out in any way. And so it's not clear why NICE, this evil organization, wants to recruit him specifically. You don't know the organization's motivations. And so it all just seems very weird and disconnected. Even more so, they do a terrible job trying to recruit him. Like, he's at a party one night and they're all super friendly. They're like, yeah, Mark, you're awesome. And then the next morning they're like, oh, what are you doing here? Get out of here. We don't like you. And then they're like, oh, you're awesome. And then they're mean to him again. Back and forth. And in fact, on more than one occasion, Mark is like, well, I'm just leaving. And they go, oh, no, don't leave. It's like, okay, if you're trying to recruit him, you're doing a really bad job at it. And by the way, why are you trying to recruit him? I don't know. It is eventually revealed, so at least some of their motivation, but like I said, that's like 200 pages in. Another point is that's not explained pretty much at all, is with Ransom himself. So Ransom, in the previous book, he received an injury on his heel. He doesn't remember when he got that injury. He just notices it after the fact. He just eventually notices that at the end of the book. And he has that injury months later at the end of the book. When the book actually finishes, he still has that injury. It still hasn't healed. Well, it's not explained how he got it, and it's not explained why it isn't healing. It doesn't even touch on that. Except, I was hoping that there'd be more of an explanation here, but there isn't. It's still just a wound that is bothering him, and it's actually significant because it impedes him from doing a lot of things. That's how bad the pain is for him. But why isn't it healing? Where did it come from? The book doesn't address this pretty much at all. At the very end, the slight spoilers, but not really, to be completely honest, it is revealed that it's not healing because he left the planet Perelandra. But after he noticed this wound on his heel, he was still on Perelandra for at least a month. And it still didn't heal then. So, what? And I really had to think about it for a while, and I eventually figured out where it came from. And for better or worse, like, the information is practically there if you think about it. It's just not given to you. Well, he was fighting Lucifer in the previous book, Perelandra. And God gave Lucifer the power to bruise man's heel. That's why his heel is injured. Again, why? Don't know. That's not explained in any way. It's just there. So there's probably like some like intellectual, philosophical thing that if I just had the same intellect of C.S. Lewis, I could understand the symbolism of it all. But I don't know. So it really feels like you get too much information that's just wildly useless, and you get too little information of what's actually critical and important. And for a book this size, that's tiresome. The third problem that the book has with the story is there's no emotional core. There's no emotional attachment. So with the previous books, Out of the Silent Planet and Perelandra, you really could feel C.S. Lewis's love of the planets he created, their inhabitants, the languages, the cultures. You could really feel that C.S. Lewis was having fun with it, that he was enjoying exploring these ideas and stories. I feel none of that in this book. It honestly feels like an academic scholar decided to try to write a story and he doesn't understand emotion at all. That's what it feels like. And kind of like C.S. Lewis, he didn't know how to finish the trilogy, but he had to finish the trilogy, so he just wrote something and just wrote a lot of words so he could get paid a lot of money. I'm not saying that that's what happened, but I'm saying that's the feel I get from the book. And even C.S. Lewis, I discovered this after I finished reading it. There is a subtitle to the book, and that's on the title page. The subtitle is A Modern Fairy Tale for Grown-Ups. And C.S. Lewis explains in the preface why he specifically called this a fairy tale. Because he didn't want someone who hates fantasy picking up this book, reading the first 50 pages and thinking, oh, this is a really cool book, this is awesome, and then being disappointed when all the fantastical elements eventually show up. So, personally, if you have to explain that your book is a fairy tale, maybe it's not as fairy tale-like as you planned it to be, personally. And I really didn't... It didn't feel like a fairy tale to me, to be completely honest. It didn't have a fairy tale feel. It does technically fit the definition of a fairy tale. I mean, it has a wizard in Merlin. Yes, Merlin of Arthurian legend. He's in this, which is totally unexpected. And it does have fantastical elements, of course. But it also has an animal companion of sorts. Yeah, there's this bear that lives with Dr. Ransom. Does the bear really do anything? No. He's not really all that significant, but he's there for some reason. I don't know why. Again, maybe this is just beyond, maybe it's just over my head. Maybe I'm just not, I just don't have the high enough intellect to understand what C.S. Lewis is doing here. So, again, like I said, there's no emotional core to the story. So, should you read this book? Honestly, I think you would be okay skipping it. First off, like C.S. Lewis said, it is a fairy tale for grown-ups. This is not intended for children. Not that there's anything particularly adult about the book, but it's more along the lines that children are going to be bored out of their minds and not going to get it. I mean, I had a monstrous time getting through this book because, like I said, I wondered if I was reading the right book, and there was just a lot of details missing, a lot of stuff just going over my head. It was a trial. Again, it's a good piece of literature. So if you want to read everything that C.S. Lewis wrote, you won't exactly be disappointed here because it is C.S. Lewis. But if you're looking for a cool, good, compelling, interesting story, you may want to look elsewhere. But on that point, should you read the trilogy? Because now I've finished the trilogy, well, I think you'd be perfectly happy reading book one. Book one works great as a standalone novel, and personally, I think it's the best one out of the three. And it's the most approachable as well, given its length, and given it doesn't go really too deep in philosophy and theology, and Lewis's explorations of Christianity and religion. So it's much more approachable. Perelandra, the target audience gets smaller. And then that Hideous Strength, the target audience gets even smaller. So much so that C.S. Lewis had to explain, by the way, this is a fairy tale. You may not believe me, but it is. So, there you go. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you for being here. Now, have you read that Hideous Strength? Have you read, I was about to say Peter Jackson. Have you read C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy? If you have, tell me what you think about it. Because I found it fascinating. I really did enjoy the journey. Did I enjoy reading all the books? No, not fully. I'll be honest there. This one was particularly difficult for me to get through, but I did enjoy the journey. And what C.S. Lewis book do you really like? What other book should what C.S. Lewis book should we explore next? Because he has a lot of really good books. Again, thank you for being here. You are amazing. Now go find yourself a good book.